romper room where we ball a break. Big wins, big losses, all at stake. Party vibe, poker life, always crunk. Feel rich, feel broke, that's just the funk, yeah. Seen boys rise, seen boys fall. Bluffing stacks, risking it all. Got the queens, thought I locked the pot. Straight flush flip, now I'm feeling shot. It's the hustle, it's the grind, no time to assume. All in a full life in the romper room.
Welcome back to the Poker Room Podcast. Today we are continuing our series on Run Deep in poker tournaments.
Yeah, it feels like just yesterday we were talking about tells.
Right.
And today we're back.
Yeah.
Ready to unpack even more strategies to help you navigate the ever-evolving world of tournament poker in 2025.
Okay, so before we get lost in the hand histories, I think it's important to set the stage.
Sure.
What's different about tournament poker in 2025? What's making it even tougher to run deep these days?
Well, the game is getting tougher because the players are getting better.
Yeah.
There's just so much information out there now, training sites, YouTube channels, like Be the Shark Poker, which we'll be referencing today.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone's studying, everyone's trying to up their game. So if you want to win, you can't just rely on the same old tricks.
So it's not enough to just memorize a chart or two. We need to be adaptable. We need to evolve our strategies.
Exactly, and that's what we're going to explore today. 7 powerful strategies that can help you not only survive, but thrive in this new landscape. Consider these your cheat codes to unlock a whole new level of poker success.
Cheat codes for crushing tournaments. I love it. And speaking of crushing it, just a quick reminder to our listeners.
Yeah.
If you have any braining poker questions or maybe a topic you'd love us to deep dive into, shoot us an email at romperroompoker@gmail.com.
Absolutely.
We love hearing from you.
Now, let's get down to business. The first strategy we need to talk about is the evolution of check raising. It's not a new concept, but the way it's being used is changing, becoming even more powerful in 2025.
All right, check raising, classic poker move. But what's changing? How is it evolving to fit this new landscape?
Well, players are using it not just as a value bet when they have the nuts, but also as a bluff, especially on boards that drastically change the hand possibilities. We call these dynamic boards.
Dynamic boards, that sounds intriguing. Can you give us an example?
Sure, imagine a flop with 2 hearts and a queen. This board screams potential. Flushes, straights, pairs, making it ripe for deception with a well-timed check raise.
So you're saying players are using check raises on these dynamic boards to represent a wider range of hands. Strong made hands and bluffs.
Exactly, and this makes it harder for opponents to put you on a specific hand, keeping them guessing, off balance. It's a multifaceted weapon for both accumulating chips and controlling the flow of the hand.
It's like a chameleon blending into the poker environment, making it difficult to know what it's really holding.
That's a great way to put it. Mastering this technique is especially crucial in low to mid stakes tournaments where players might not be as adept at deciphering these more nuanced plays.
Yeah, it makes sense. If you can master the art of the deceptive check raise, you can really exploit the tendencies of less experienced players.
Absolutely. Now, this concept of deception and control actually leads us nicely into our next strategy, the dominance of pot control in 2025.
Pot control.
Yeah.
Is that just a fancy way of saying we're playing tight?
Not exactly. It's more about understanding how to manage the size of the pot, particularly in the context of the small ball strategy that's dominating the tournament scene.
Small ball. Does that mean we're swapping our chips for marbles? I'm not sure I'm coordinated enough for that.
No marbles involved. Small ball in poker refers to a style of play where you focus on making smaller, more frequent bets as opposed to those huge all-in, super risky plays.
So it's about minimizing those huge swings in our stack, those moments where we're either shipping a boatload of chips or watching them sail away.
Exactly. It's about minimizing variance and maximizing control. Think of it like building a house brick by brick instead of trying to erect a skyscraper in one go.
So steady, calculated growth instead of boom or bust plays.
Precisely. With smaller bets, you're carefully building your stack, maneuvering post-flop, dictating the pace of the hand. It's less about gambling and more about calculated aggression, which aligns perfectly with the mindset needed to run deep.
I can see how this appeals to a lot of players, especially those who thrive on consistency and making deep runs in tournaments. It's about longevity, not just flashy, short-lived wins.
Exactly. It's a strategy that favors those who want to grind it out, build their stacks steadily, and chip away at their opponents. It's the tortoise, not the hare, winning the poker race.
Sounds like a recipe for tournament success to me. Now, before we dive into the next strategy, I want to take a moment to address our listeners. If you're enjoying this deep dive into tournament strategies, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Shoot us an email at romperroompoker@gmail.com and let us know what's resonating with you.
We always appreciate hearing from our listeners. Now let's shift gears and talk about a strategy that might surprise you. Game selection. I know it sounds basic, but it's become more crucial than ever in 2025.
I get it, choosing the right game is important. But aren't we already talking about tournament strategy? Isn't that specific enough?
Yes, but it's not just about choosing the right tournament format anymore. It's about game specialization. It's about knowing your strengths, honing those skills, and focusing on the games where you have a true edge.
So it's not enough to just be a tournament player.
Mm-hmm.
We need to specialize within that world.
Exactly. Remember that YouTube poker expert we mentioned, Be the Shark Poker? He actually shared a story about how his profits exploded when he stopped trying to be a jack of all trades and focused on the specific tournament formats where he truly excelled.
So it's about finding your poker niche, the games where you feel most comfortable and confident.
Precisely. And this is where I challenge you, our listener, to really analyze your own game. What are your strengths? Where do you shine? What games do you consistently crush? And conversely, what are your weaknesses? What games make you want to tear your hair out? By identifying these areas, you can start making strategic decisions about where to focus your time and energy.
That makes a lot of sense. Why waste time and money on games where you're just spinning your wheels? Better to focus on where you have the edge.
Exactly. Focus on where you can exploit the weaknesses of your opponents, and that's where you'll see the real results.
All right, I'm feeling inspired to do some serious self-reflection and game analysis. But before I get lost in spreadsheets and hand histories, let's move on to our next game-changing strategy.
Let's talk about a strategy that, while not entirely extinct, is definitely on the decline. The good old all-in or fold approach.
Wait, really? I thought shoving all your chips in preflop was like a poker tournament a rite of passage.
It used to be, especially in the Wild West days of online poker. But as players have become more skilled, particularly post-flop, this mindless aggression has become less effective.
So it's not about those big, dramatic showdowns anymore.
Not as much.
Yeah.
The real battles are being fought post-flop, where strategic thinking and nuanced decision-making are paramount. Remember, we talked about small ball being king. Well, this shift is directly tied to that.
So it's not just about brute force anymore. It's about finesse, strategy, and outmaneuvering our opponents post-flop.
Precisely. Now, don't get me wrong, pre-flop jamming still has its place in specific situations, but it's far from the default strategy it once was.
Ooh, a cliffhanger. I'm dying to know when those specific situations might arise. But I guess we'll have to wait for part 2 of our deep dive to unravel that mystery.
You got it. We'll unpack all the nuances of when and why pre-flop aggression can still be effective. But for now, let's keep the momentum going and delve into our next cutting-edge strategy.
All right, lead the way. What's next on our agenda for poker domination?
Welcome back to the poker room. We're picking up right where we left off, dissecting those game-changing strategies for crushing tournaments in 2025.
You got it. We were just about to uncover the secrets of exploitative 3-betting when we left off.
Ah, yes, exploitative 3-betting. This is where we start moving beyond those purely mathematical strategies like GTO and really start focusing on the art of poker.
So we're talking about reading our opponents, understanding their tendencies, and then using that information to our advantage.
Precisely. It's about recognizing patterns in their play, who's overfolding, who's overly aggressive, and then tailoring our 3-betting strategy accordingly. It's like custom fitting our game plan to each opponent.
So instead of just blindly following a chart, we're using our poker brains to outsmart our opponents.
Exactly. For example, let's say you're up against a player who folds to 3 bets almost every time. You've noticed they're terrified of confrontation. This is a prime opportunity for exploitative 3-betting.
So you'd 3-bet them with a wider range of hands, knowing they're likely to fold even if we don't have the best hand.
That's the idea. You're essentially bluffing them out of the pot before the flop even comes. Of course, you need to be careful not to overdo it. If they catch on to your strategy, they might start fighting back.
So it's a delicate dance between aggression and deception. We need to apply pressure, but also make sure we're not being too predictable.
Exactly, and that's what makes exploitative play so challenging and rewarding. It requires a deep understanding of poker psychology, the ability to read your opponents, and the guts to pull the trigger when the opportunity arises.
It sounds like a skill that separates the good players from the great ones, those who can truly master the mental game of poker.
Absolutely. Now, to really excel at exploitative 3-betting, we need to understand another key concept, our opponent's range.
Right, we touched on range earlier. Remind us what that means and why it's so important in this context.
Range refers to the possible hands an opponent might have in a given situation. For example, if a tight player raises from early position, their range is likely to be very strong. big pairs, aces, kings, that sort of thing.
So if we know their range is likely to be strong, we should only 3-bet them with our premium hands.
Exactly. But if their range is weaker, let's say a loose aggressive player raising from late position, we can expand our 3-betting range to include more bluffs because they're more likely to be playing a wider range of hands themselves.
It's all starting to click now. It's about understanding who we're up against and tailoring our play to exploit their weaknesses.
Precisely. Exploitative 3-betting is a powerful weapon in the arsenal of any skilled tournament player. But remember, it's not just about mindless aggression. It's about using information, observation, and a bit of poker cunning to gain an edge.
This is fantastic stuff. I'm starting to see how all these seemingly simple strategies are actually quite complex and nuanced.
That's the beauty of poker. It's a game of constant learning and adaptation. There's always something new to discover, a new angle to explore, a new way to outsmart your opponents.
Speaking of new angles, you mentioned earlier that the good old all-in or fold strategy isn't completely dead. It still has its place in modern tournament poker. Can you elaborate on that? When does this seemingly outdated strategy still work in 2025?
You're right, it's not completely extinct, just more nuanced. Remember, poker is all about adapting to your opponents and the situation.
So context is key.
Absolutely. Think about those bubble situations in tournaments. Tensions are high, everyone's desperate to cash, and stacks are often getting shallow.
Ah, the bubble, where dreams are made and crushed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now imagine you're on the bubble with a short stack. Let's say you've got 10 big blinds left. In this scenario, shoving all in pre-flop can still be a powerful weapon
Why is that?
because it puts immense pressure on your opponents, especially those with larger stacks. They have more to lose by busting out before the money, so they're often more likely to fold even marginal hands.
So you're essentially using their fear against them.
Precisely. You're leveraging the bubble dynamics to your advantage. Of course, this doesn't mean you should just jam any 2 cards. You still need to be selective, choosing hands that have a decent chance of winning if called.
So it's a calculated risk, not a blind shove fest.
Exactly. It's about understanding the dynamics of the bubble, your opponent's tendencies, and then making the most plus EV play. Sometimes that means shoving, sometimes it means folding, and sometimes it means playing a more small ball approach.
This makes a lot of sense. So pre-flop jamming isn't extinct. It just needs to be used strategically, especially in high-pressure situations like the bubble.
Precisely. Now let's shift gears and talk about a strategy we've already touched upon, but that deserves a deeper dive. The art of the delayed c-bet.
Okay, remind us. What exactly is delayed c-bet, and what makes it so effective in the modern tournament landscape?
A delayed c-bet occurs when you check back on the flop with a strong hand, allowing your opponent to bet, and then you raise on a later street, typically the turn or the river.
So it's like setting a trap, lulling our opponent into a false sense of security.
Exactly. You're giving them the illusion of control, then bam, you spring the trap and take down the pot.
I love it. It sounds so sneaky and satisfying. But why wouldn't we just bet out on the flop with our strong hand?
There are a few reasons. First, it disguises the strength of your hand. If you're always betting out on the flop with strong holdings, your opponents will catch on and start folding. But by mixing things up, you keep them guessing.
So it's all about being unpredictable, keeping our opponents on their toes.
Precisely. Second, a delayed c-bet can induce bluffs. If your opponent senses weakness on the flop, they might fire a bet on the turn hoping to steal the pot. And that's when you pounce with your raise, taking advantage of their aggression.
So we're essentially turning their bluff into our profit.
Exactly. And third, a delayed c-bet allows you to control the size of the pot. If you bet out on the flop, your opponent might just call, keeping the pot relatively small. But if you check back and they bet you can raise, bloating the pot and maximizing your winnings when you have the best hand.
It's like a triple threat. Deception, bluff catching, and pot control. All in one brilliant strategy.
You got it. But mastering the delayed c-bet takes practice and a good feel for your opponents. You need to be able to accurately assess their tendencies, understand their betting patterns, and know when they're likely to be bluffing.
It sounds like a strategy that's best suited for experienced players who have a good read on their opponents.
That's generally true. However, even less experienced players can start incorporating delayed c-bets into their game by paying close attention to their opponent's behavior and looking for opportunities to set traps.
That's encouraging to hear. Now, before we move on, is there anything else you want to emphasize about the art of the delayed c-bet?
Just this, it's not a one-size-fits-all strategy. It's important to be selective about when you use it, choosing situations where it's most likely to be effective. For example, if you're up against a very passive player who rarely bluffs, a delayed c-bet might not be the best play.
So as always in poker, context is key. We need to be adaptable and adjust our strategies based on the specific situation and our opponents.
Exactly. Now, we've covered a lot of ground in this episode, from the rise of check raising to the nuances of delayed c-betting. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to circle back to a concept we touched upon earlier, the power of exploitative folding.
Okay, remind us why folding is so important, especially in the context of being exploitative.
Remember, poker is a game of information and decision-making. It's not just about playing the cards you're dealt, it's about playing the player, understanding their tendencies, and making the most profitable decision based on that information.
So sometimes the most profitable decision is to fold, even if we have a decent hand.
Exactly, especially when we're up against aggressive players who are constantly applying pressure.
Can you give us an example of how exploitative folding might play out in a hand?
Let's say you're in a hand with a player who, loves to bluff. They're constantly betting and raising even when they don't have a strong hand. Now, you find yourself in a pot with this player and you have top pair, a decent hand, but they fire out a massive bet on the turn.
What do we do?
This is where exploitative folding comes in. Based on your knowledge of this player's tendencies, you know that there's a good chance they're bluffing. So even though you have top pair, you make the disciplined decision to fold, saving yourself a lot of chips in the process.
So it's about recognizing when our opponent is likely to be bluffing and refusing to give them a free showdown.
Precisely. It's about denying them value and avoiding those costly confrontations where we're likely to be outmatched. Remember, in poker, sometimes the best hand you can play is no hand at all.
That's some deep poker wisdom right there. But I have a question. How do we know for sure when our opponent is bluffing? It seems like a risky proposition to fold a decent hand based on a hunch.
You're right, it's not always easy to tell when someone's bluffing. But there are certain tells and betting patterns that can give us clues. For example, if a player who's normally passive suddenly starts betting big, it could be a sign that they're trying to represent a stronger hand than they actually have.
So it's about paying attention to their deviations from their normal behavior.
Exactly. Another tell is bet sizing. If a player who normally bets small suddenly starts firing out huge bets, it could be a sign that they're bluffing. They're trying to scare you off with their aggression.
So it's like a poker mind game, trying to decipher their true intentions behind their bets.
Precisely. And that's what makes exploitative folding so challenging and rewarding. It's about understanding your opponents, reading their tells, and making those tough decisions based on incomplete information.
This is all great stuff, but I'm getting the sense that we're about to wrap up part 2 of our deep dive. Is there anything else you want to add about exploitative folding before we move on to the final part?
Just this. It's a skill that takes time and practice to develop. It's about being observant, disciplined, and willing to let go of those hands that, while they may look good on the surface, are likely to be losers in the long run.
Excellent advice. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break here, but don't go anywhere. In part 3 of our deep dive, we'll be revisiting all 7 of these powerful strategies, exploring the nuances, connections between them, and providing you with actionable insights to help you dominate tournament poker in 2025. And remember, if you have any burning poker questions or topics you'd love us to deep dive into, shoot us an email at romperroompoker@gmail.com. We'd love hearing from you. Welcome back to the Poker Room for the final chapter of our deep dive into dominating tournament poker in 2025.
That's right. We've spent the last 2 parts unpacking 7 powerful strategies that can truly transform your game.
Right.
But now it's time to bring it all together, to connect the dots and see how these strategies work in harmony.
Okay, I'm ready to see how this poker puzzle fits together. Let's weave those strategic threads and create a tapestry of tournament domination.
I like that. Think back to our discussion of pot control and the rise of small ball. It's about minimizing variance, making calculated bets, and maneuvering post-flop.
Right, it's about playing the long game, carefully building our stack and avoiding those massive swings of fortune.
Exactly. And this connects directly to exploitative folding.
Yeah?
When you're playing a more measured style, you're less likely to find yourself trapped in those colossal pots where you're forced to make agonizing decisions with mediocre hands.
So, pot control and exploitative folding work together to keep us out of trouble and preserve our precious chips for those key moments.
Precisely. Now let's add another layer: delayed c-betting.
Okay.
This strategy thrives in a small ball environment. When you're not constantly blasting the flop with bets, you create those enticing opportunities to set traps, induce bluffs, and extract maximum value when you do hold a strong hand.
It's like we're playing poker chess, setting up those intricate traps, and waiting for our opponent to make a fatal move.
I love that analogy, and this interconnectedness extends to exploitative 3-betting as well. When you're playing a more controlled pot control style, you can afford to be more aggressive with your three bets, knowing that you're not risking your entire tournament life on every hand.
So we can use those three bets to punish those loose cannon players, steal blinds, and steadily build our stack without exposing ourselves to unnecessary risk.
Exactly. It's like a perfectly synchronized dance, each step flowing seamlessly into the next. And at the heart of this intricate dance is game selection and specialization. By choosing the games where you have a genuine edge, where your style of play is most effective, you're setting the stage for success.
It's like finding your poker soulmate, the games that perfectly complement your strengths and minimize your weaknesses.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And even those seemingly outdated strategies like pre-flop jamming can still find their place in this harmonious ecosystem. When used strategically in those specific high-pressure situations we discussed earlier, they can be surprisingly effective.
So it's not about discarding old-school strategies altogether. It's about understanding when and where they're still relevant in the modern poker landscape.
Exactly. These 7 strategies are not rigid rules etched in stone. They're adaptable guidelines tools that you can use to craft a dynamic and ever-evolving approach to tournament poker.
This has been an incredibly eye-opening journey. I feel like I've gained a whole new level of understanding about tournament strategy.
I'm thrilled to hear that. But remember, knowledge without application is like a car without an engine. We need to take these strategies from the classroom to the poker tables.
That's right. It's time to put theory into practice and see how these strategies perform in the real world of poker battles.
And as you do, I encourage you to pay close attention to your own game, to your opponents, and to the ever-shifting landscape of tournament poker. Be adaptable, refine your strategies, and never stop learning.
Wise words to live by both on and off the felt. Now, before we officially close the curtain on this epic deep dive, I want to extend an invitation to our listeners. If you're eager to explore other areas of poker strategy or have specific questions you'd like us to tackle, don't hesitate to drop us a line at romperoompapoker@gmail.com. We're always excited to delve into the intricacies of this fascinating game.
Absolutely. We thrive on engaging with our listeners and helping them elevate their poker prowess.
And with that, we've reached the end of our deep dive into dominating tournament poker in 2025. It's been a thrilling adventure filled with strategic insights, thought-provoking discussions, and hopefully a few aha moments along the way.
It certainly has. And before we sign off, I have one final question for our listener.
Okay.
Which of these 7 strategies resonates most strongly with your current playing style? Is it the calculated aggression of small ball, the deceptive brilliance of the delayed c-bet, or perhaps the disciplined art of exploitative folding? Take a moment to reflect on your game and consider which of these strategies you'll embrace as you embark on your next poker conquest.
That's an excellent question to ponder as you return to the virtual or live felt. And remember, regardless of which strategies you choose to integrate into your arsenal, the key to sustained success in poker lies in your ability to adapt, evolve, and always strive to outmaneuver your opponents.
May your cards be hot and your reads be sharp. Until next time, keep crushing those tournaments.
And that concludes another episode of The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time for another exciting exploration of the world of poker.